So if we rewind to 1177 BC, you have the most interconnected, globalized, and just massively wealthy civilization the world had ever seen, the Bronze Age
Oh,
Mediterranean.
absolutely. It was a completely sprawling matrix.
Right, like this intricate web of trade stretching from Greece to Egypt, Babylon, all the way over to the Hittite Empire.
Yeah.
And then within literally a single generation, it just completely collapsed.
Just fell off a cliff.
Exactly. Writing was basically forgotten in several regions.
Mm.
International trade just vanished. These magnificent, heavily fortified cities literally burned to the ground. And for centuries, historians and theologians, they looked at that sudden apocalyptic drop-off and they just blamed it on, well, angry gods.
Right, or the mysterious sea peoples. Just cataclysmic bad luck.
Yeah, and the terrifying part is that we actually preferred those mystical explanations. It's comforting. But today, we have the telemetry data. We can look at the pollen counts in the sediment cores, the isotopic signatures in the ice, the accounting tablets in the ashes, and it turns out societal collapse isn't an act of God. It's an act of math.
It's pure math. And that is the exact pivot point we are exploring today. We're moving away from this realm of mythological fate and stepping directly into the realm of predictive reliability and systems engineering.
Welcome to the deep dive. If you're listening to this, you're the kind of person who doesn't just want to know that a bridge collapsed, right? You want to see the sheared bolts. You want to see the stress test algorithms.
Okay.
And that is exactly our mission today.
We are getting into the absolute nuts and bolts of civilizational survival.
Yeah, so we are looking at a very specific stack of research today. It's Lecture 9 from the Tolu-e-Islam digital audio series. And this provides a rigorous foundational analysis of verses 69 through 81 of chapter 27 of the Quran, Surah An-Naml.
And we really need to set the stakes immediately here, because the approach our source material takes to this text is, it's a massive paradigm shift.
It changes everything about how you read it.
Completely. For hundreds of years, this specific sequence of verses has been trapped behind this glass case of religious sentimentality. People just read these passages as mere sacred narratives, like stories meant to evoke a vague sense of piety or just fear of divine retribution.
Right. It's the traditional Sunday school approach. Just behave or the sky will fall on you.
Exactly. But the source material we are deconstructing today strips away every single ounce of that theological fatalism. What we are actually looking at is a highly sophisticated empirical research program.
It's a diagnostic manual.
Yes, it's a diagnostic manual for societal collapse. Today, we are not having a comparative religion seminar. We are engaging in a masterclass in sociology, institutional hysteresis, and just pure systems engineering.
Okay, so let's reverse engineer this a bit, because the traditional inherited approach to any ancient scripture is this concept of scripture as evidence, right? The text says a city fell because its people were corrupt, and the reader is just expected to nod and accept it on blind faith.
Right. The book itself is supposed to be the proof.
Exactly. But the source points out that verse 27.69 completely explodes that myth. It literally translates to say, travel the earth and see what was the end of the criminals.
And what's so fascinating here is the absolute refusal of the text to rely on its own authority for these physical claims. It is an empirical injunction.
It's telling you to go outside.
Yes. The text is literally instructing its audience to close the book. It's pointing away from itself. It's saying, look, the evidence for what happens to a socioeconomic structure built on exploitation, what the text calls the path of the facet or the corrupt, that evidence isn't found in a holy ledger.
Right, it's sitting in the dirt.
It is sitting right there in the dirt.
But wait, hold on. Let me just push back on this idea of the earth as a perfect evidentiary record. Because, history is notoriously written by the victors.
Sure, narrative history is, yeah.
Right, so if a corrupt, hyper-militarized empire wipes out a marginalized group, steals their resources, and then literally paves over their cities, that narrative record is gone. So how can the earth be a reliable data set if corrupt elites have the power to just erase the archaeological evidence of their crimes?
Well, that is a crucial distinction, and it really gets to the heart of the systems theory we're discussing. You are absolutely right that narrative history can be erased. A dictator can burn the library.
Yeah, they rewrite the monuments.
Exactly. A conquering army can rewrite the monuments, but you cannot erase thermodynamics. You cannot erase the physical, systemic markers of civilizational strain.
Okay, give me an example of that. What did that actually look like in the ground?
Okay, let's look at the ancient empires of the Near East, like the pharaohs or the civilization of Thamud, which our source material frequently references. A regime might erase the names of its political dissidents. But if that regime centralized wealth to such a severe degree that they exhausted their labor class to build monolithic monuments,
Then the biological toll of that is going to show up.
yes, it leaves a permanent isotopic signature. We can dig up the mass graves of the workers and physically measure the malnutrition in their bone density.
Wow.
Furthermore, if they over-extracted resources to fund elite luxury, say, by over-irrigating the Mesopotamian basin, the narrative history might call it a glorious era of agricultural surplus, right?
But the ground says something else.
The archaeological stratigraphy will show a massive spike in soil salinization, and that's followed by a dramatic drop in crop yields, which is followed by demographic collapse. So the victors can lie in their textbooks all day long. They cannot lie to the carbon isotopes.
That is just staggering. The political spin is literally irrelevant to the geological strata, which I think brings us perfectly to the specific linguistic focus of the source material, because it examines the actual Arabic phrase used in the text Sifufi al-ar, which means travel the earth.
Right, and we really need to look at the verb there, Sire. It does not mean taking a casual stroll.
It's not a vacation.
Exactly. It doesn't mean becoming a historical tourist, taking selfies in front of the ruins of Petra and saying, wow, look at these cool old rocks.
Right, like, oh, what a tragedy.
Yeah, Sarah implies sustained movement, an active, purposeful journey of investigation. It's a methodological instruction to conduct rigorous field research. You have to build your knowledge of systemic consequences from direct observation of specific historical conditions.
So it's essentially the difference between reading a macroeconomic theory in a textbook and actually going to a deindustrialized Rust Belt city, measuring the localized poverty rates, and mapping the supply chain failures yourself.
Precisely. You have to go to where the evidence is. And that connects directly to one of the most fundamentally misunderstood phrases in this entire sequence. Verse 27.75. It says, "There is not a hidden thing in the sky or earth, but it is in a clear record."
The Kitab Mubin, the clear record. Now, traditionally, that's treated as this giant magical ledger kept on a cloud somewhere, right? Like angels with quill pens writing down every single time someone steals a loaf of bread.
Which is an interpretation that demands total magical thinking. And honestly, it provides zero actionable data for managing a society. The source material redefines the Kitab Mubin entirely. The clear record is the observable historical and physical universe itself.
So the physical universe is the book.
The earth, the cosmos, the laws of physics and sociology. If a society builds an economy based on unsustainable extraction, let's say they clear-cut their forests to build a massive naval fleet. We saw this with the collapse on Easter Island or certain periods of the Mayan Empire.
Right, they just devour their own ecosystem.
Yeah, and that systemic error isn't hidden in some mystical dimension. It is recorded in the soil erosion. It's recorded in the sudden disappearance of large timber pollen in the sediment cores, and it's recorded in the ensuing famine.
Because physics doesn't lie.
Exactly. The record is clear, Mubin, because physics and chemistry do not possess the capacity to deceive. The only reason these consequences are ever considered hidden is because the people in power actively choose not to look at the data.
And this brings us right to the friction point. Because if a society is heading toward a cliff, and the telemetry data in this clear record shows they're going to crash, well, a systems analyst is going to point that out.
Yeah.
But the ruling class never, ever wants to hear it.
Never.
Which leads us to verse 27.72. And the Force presents this as just a quietly devastating analysis of elite psychology. It says, say, perhaps some of what you seek to hasten is already close behind you.
This is just a masterclass in deconstructing bad faith arguments. The phrase, seek to hasten yastajilan in the Arabic, it refers to a very specific rhetorical trick used by the societal elite, what the text calls the mala.
Right, the leadership class.
Yeah, so whenever a reformer, and we should think of the reformer as a systems physician, whenever they point out that the current social scaffolding is fundamentally corrupt and will collapse, the elite don't engage with the mathematical models. They don't look at the data.
They just demand a lightning strike.
Exactly. They demand immediate catastrophic proof. They say, oh, our economic model is doomed. Fine, let's see the collapse today. If your warning is true, bring on the catastrophe right now.
It's the equivalent of a CEO laughing off a warning about a massive financial bubble by saying, well, our stock price is at an all-time high today, and the market didn't crash this morning, so your predictive models are obviously garbage.
Yes. They use the absence of immediate Hollywood-style destruction as proof that the underlying system is stable. But the system's response here is chilling. Perhaps some of what you seek to hasten is already close behind you?
It's already happening.
Yes. It raises this vital question about the timescales of systemic decay.
Right, so let's look at the mechanics of that. Why doesn't the system collapse the exact moment the corrupt action is taken?
Because of lag indicators. The overarching framework of this text is built on what the source calls the law of requital, mukafat An-Naml. This law dictates that actions have intrinsic consequences, but those consequences operate on thermodynamic and sociological timescales.
Which are way longer than a human lifespan usually.
Yeah. Exactly. These timescales are often entirely invisible within a single human political cycle or, a single fiscal quarter.
Right, it's like institutional hysteresis.
Yeah.
If a government decides to completely defund its public education system just to give a massive tax cut to the top 1%, the society doesn't collapse the next morning.
No, of course not.
In fact, for a few years, the GDP might even look artificially inflated because of all that injected capital at the top.
But the process of collapse is already running. The moment the education infrastructure was gutted, the death of that society's future innovation capacity was mathematically sealed.
It's baked into the math.
It is. A generation later, you have a massive skills deficit, rampant inequality, and the resulting civic unrest. The elite demand to hasten the doom, and the analyst replies, I don't need to. The structural fatigue is already in the steel. The engine of your destruction is already running. You just can't feel the vibration yet.
I really want to drill down into this law of requital, the mukafat An-Naml, because we really need to elevate how we think about consequences. The source material spends a lot of time divorcing this concept from our standard, frankly primitive, ideas of crime and punishment.
Yeah, to truly grasp the law of requital, we have to move past the idea of man-made legal codes. We need to look at human action through the lens of something much closer to behavioral economics and thermodynamics. You have to separate intrinsic consequence from external reward.
The source uses a really basic analogy about health-like walking versus paying someone to walk for you. But let's scale that up a bit. Let's look at it in terms of systemic externalities.
That's the perfect framing for this. Okay, imagine a massive industrial factory. The owners figure out that they can save millions of dollars by bypassing their filtration systems and just dumping toxic runoff directly into the local river.
Okay, classic corporate villainy.
Right. Now, they hire a team of elite lawyers and lobby the local government to officially change the zoning laws. The government passes a bill making the dumping 100% legal.
So under the man-made legal code, no crime has been committed. The police aren't going to arrest the CEO. The shareholders are thrilled because the profit margin just widened. The external human-invented system says everything is totally fine.
Exactly. The legal matrix is completely silent, but the clear record, the physical and sociological matrix, is not.
The river doesn't care about the law.
No, it doesn't. The law of requital registers a massive injection of systemic entropy. The heavy metals in the river begin bioaccumulating in the local fish population. The local working class, who rely on that water source, begin experiencing a spike in autoimmune diseases and neurological developmental issues in their children.
Which means the local healthcare infrastructure gets overwhelmed, the labor pool becomes sick and inefficient, and the generational cognitive capacity of that entire town drops.
And eventually, that localized decay acts as an anchor on the broader regional economy. The factory owner might live in a gated mansion 50 miles away, drinking imported bottled water, thinking he has successfully bypassed the consequences of his actions just because he changed the man-made law.
Right, he thinks he won.
But the intrinsic consequence, the negative externality, is inescapable. It mathematically accumulates in the system. The degradation of the social and physical architecture is absolute, regardless of what the legal code permits.
That structural reality gives so much weight to the anecdote from the source material about the grandfather's coin. I want to spend a moment on the psychological payload of this story because it brings this massive macroeconomic theory down to the neurology of a single human being.
It's such a vital micro-level illustration. Please lay it out for us.
Okay, so the speaker in the source material recalls being a young boy, maybe 9 years old, in an undivided Punjab decades ago. He's walking down a dirt road and finds a tiny, virtually worthless denomination of a coin. But, to a kid, finding money is exhilarating.
Oh, yeah, it's the best thing ever.
Exactly. So he runs home, bursts through the door, and proudly shows his grandfather this coin he just found. But his grandfather, who's a deeply educated physician, forces the boy to walk all the way back to the exact spot in the road and leave the coin in the dirt.
Just put it right back.
Yeah. And the boy is crying, arguing, but if I leave it, someone else will take it. It doesn't belong to anybody. I found it. And the grandfather tells him, if it was not yours to begin with, You have no right to pick it up. It does not matter if someone else takes it. It does not matter if the owner is gone.
Now, if we look at the grandfather's logic through the lens of systems theory, he is clearly not operating on a legal framework. There were no police around. No one was going to sue a 9-year-old over a fraction of a penny.
Right. It wasn't about the external risk of getting caught.
The grandfather understood the neuroplasticity of corruption. He understood that the exact moment a human being extracts value from a system that they did not inject their own labor into, they begin rewriting their own internal operating system.
Wow.
The physical coin is irrelevant. The psychological conditioning is catastrophic.
It's the normalization of unearned extraction. The boy thought he was just picking up a piece of metal. The grandfather knew he was installing a virus into his own character architecture. It's the belief that, hey, I can take what isn't mine as long as the system isn't watching.
And when you scale that psychological virus up from a 9-year-old boy to the executive board of a multinational bank, or the military high command of a superpower, you get the collapse of civilization.
You get 2008.
You get predatory lending practices that trigger global recessions. You get resource wars. They operate on the exact same logic as the boy. They think, we can extract this wealth because there is no international police force strong enough to stop us.
But the law of requital always balances the ledger, which leads to the obvious, cynical pushback you always hear. Well, what about the corrupt dictator who extracts billions, starves his people, and then dies peacefully in his sleep in a Swiss chalet at age 90? Where is the thermodynamic consequence there?
This is where we have to completely abandon our sentimental desire for individual cosmic revenge.
We want the lightning bolt again.
We do. But the systems engineer does not care whether a biological organism feels personal regret on its deathbed. The consequence is systemic. The dictator's unearned extraction hollowed out the institutions of his nation. The poverty he engineered created an environment of extreme scarcity.
And scarcity breeds instability.
It inevitably breeds extremism, intellectual stagnation, and violent instability. That instability will eventually detonate, perhaps a decade after his death, tearing the society apart and liquidating the very wealth he thought he secured for his dynasty.
The ledger balances on the societal level.
Exactly. There are no fugitives from the Kitab Mubin.
Seeing that math play out in real time has to place just an unimaginable cognitive and emotional burden on the systems analysts who are tracking the data. Let's talk about the reformer. The source material highlights verses where this figure is essentially grieving themselves to death.
The psychological profile of the reformer is so crucial here, because they are not depicted as an angry zealot throwing thunderbolts. They are depicted as a deeply compassionate, highly trained physician who is watching a patient commit slow suicide.
Right, it's not an ego trip for them. If a society ignores the warning, the reformer isn't mad because people didn't obey their authority. They're devastated by the sheer avoidable waste of human potential.
Right, think about it. If a doctor diagnoses a patient with a fatal but easily curable disease, something caused by terrible dietary habits, and the patient looks at the lab results, laughs, and goes back to drinking poison, well, a bad doctor just bills their insurance and walks away.
Job done.
Right. But a doctor who actually values human life is gutted. They are consumed by the tragedy of watching a consciousness voluntarily choose oblivion.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the natural instinct in that scenario, if you know you have the cure and the patient is refusing it, is to just force them. If you are watching a society drive a bus toward a cliff and you have the data proving the cliff is there, the instinct is to grab the steering wheel by force, establish an authoritarian regime of virtue, force everyone to be sustainable, force everyone to be equitable.
And that is the exact trap the source material dismantles. It offers a really profound correction to a commonly mistranslated concept. Traditionally, theological texts are translated as saying, God guides whom he wills, which implies this terrifying randomized determinism.
Right, like the universe just picks winners and losers, and if you're not picked, well, you're doomed.
But the accurate empirical reading of the Arabic syntax changes everything. It is not God guides whom he wills, it is God guides the one who wants to be guided.
The agency rests entirely with the individual node in the system, the human being.
The universal laws of equity and stability are available to every civilization, but they only activate when the society exercises its free will to align with them. The reformer cannot mandate compliance through violence or coercion.
I love the analogy the source uses here because it is just incredibly stark. You can force a goat down a road, right? If a goat is wandering toward a wolf, you can tie a rope around its neck, drag it kicking and screaming down the safe path, and lock it in a secure pen. You have achieved the optimal physical outcome for the goat.
Right, the goat is alive. But you cannot apply that methodology to a human society, because forced virtue is an oxymoron.
Exactly. If I hold a weapon to your head and force you to donate your life savings to a food bank, you are not a philanthropist.
No, you're a victim.
You haven't developed a neural pathway of empathy, you are a hostage. If the reformer uses absolute tyrannical force to make a society behave justly, they have stripped humanity of its foundational operating system free will. They have reduced a complex, conscious society to a herd of managed livestock.
The reformer's role is strictly limited to being a high-visibility signpost at a systemic crossroads. Their job is to display the telemetry data, map out the consequences of extraction versus equity, and illuminate the path of survival. But the society must physically and psychologically choose to walk it.
Which perfectly sets up the anti-reformer mindset shown in the Majnun anecdote from the source.
Yeah.
It's a classic story of Layla and Majnun.
Oh, it's a brilliant juxtaposition. So Majnun's tribe is fighting a massive bloody war against Layla's tribe. The men of Majnun's tribe are dying on the battlefield, ostensibly fighting for his honor and his right to be with Layla. And what is Majnun doing inside his tent?
He is fervently praying for his own people to be slaughtered.
Yes.
He is begging the universe to let Layla's father win the battle and crush his own tribe, simply because he is so obsessed with his individual desire for Layla. He is actively rooting for the destruction of his own macro system just to satisfy his micro-obsession.
And the reformer is the exact inverse of Majnun. The reformer is out on the battlefield, desperate for their people to win, to survive, to overcome the fatal flaws of their own corrupt elite. They are begging their society to choose life, but they are bound by the absolute law of human agency. They cannot fight the battle of free will for them.
So what happens when a society not only refuses to choose life, but actively builds mechanisms to ignore the signpost? This takes us to one of the most chilling concepts in the text, verses 27.80 and 81, the epistemic condition of a society in freefall.
Right, the deaf and blind passage. This is where the sociological analysis really reaches its peak. The text says you cannot make the deaf hear the call if they turn away. You cannot guide the blind from their misguidance.
Now, a surface-level reading of that sounds extremely dismissive. It just sounds like giving up.
But again, we have to strip away the theological fatalism. The text is not saying these people were genetically born without the capacity to process reality. It is describing the mechanics of closed feedback loops.
Right.
The deafness is not a biological defect. The deafness is an engineered state. Notice the phrasing, if they turn away, or more accurately, turning their backs while retreating.
They're cultivating their own blindness. Let's really map out the mechanism of this. How does an entire society engineer itself to be deaf to data?
By creating an institutional architecture that systematically insulates itself from the evidence of its own dysfunction. It happens through algorithmic reinforcement and cognitive dissonance on a mass scale. When a corrupt elite centralizes power, the very first thing they must do is close the feedback loops.
They capture the media ecosystems.
They capture the media, they purge whistleblowers from the corporate or political ranks, they create economic echo chambers where the ultra-wealthy only interact with other ultra-wealthy individuals.
It's like flying a commercial airliner, but the pilot decides the warning alarms in the cockpit are too annoying, so he just cuts the wires to the altitude sensors. The plane is still dropping, but the cockpit is nice and quiet.
Precisely. And human cognition adapts to that engineered silence. If you spend decades in an institutional matrix that punishes anyone who points out structural flaws and lavishly rewards sycophants who tell comforting lies, well, the collective neurology of that leadership class literally loses the capacity to process corrective information.
It's a form of induced institutional hysteresis.
Exactly. When the reformer finally stands in front of them with undeniable peer-reviewed data showing that the soil is dead, the water is toxic, and the economy is a hollow shell, the elite look at the data and they genuinely cannot comprehend it. It doesn't map onto their heavily reinforced neural pathways.
The source uses an incredibly vivid analogy for this state, diving underwater.
It perfectly illustrates the physics of the epistemic closure. If you dive 30 feet underwater, your eardrums are still biologically intact, right? You are not physically deaf. But if a systems analyst is standing on the shore screaming through a megaphone that a tsunami is approaching, you cannot hear them.
Because the medium you have chosen to submerge yourself in completely distorts and blocks the acoustic data.
Yes. The societal deafness described in the text is a result of the environment the elite have chosen to submerge themselves in. An ocean of unchecked wealth, arrogance, and extractive exploitation. The reformer can broadcast the warning at maximum volume, but the data will not penetrate the density of that medium.
So what is the operational protocol there? If the society is underwater and you can't reach them, what do you actually do?
You recognize the limits of intervention. You cannot perform corrective ear surgery on someone while they are 30 feet underwater. They have to experience the negative externalities of their environment, the lack of oxygen, and make the conscious choice to swim to the surface.
They have to pull their own heads out of the water.
They do. Only then does the acoustic environment allow the data to reach their auditory cortex. The reformer's job is to maintain the broadcast, ensuring the telemetry data is available the exact second someone chooses to surface.
That is a terrifying precipice to stand on, watching a society hold its breath until it passes out. Which brings us to the final, and perhaps most misunderstood, operational concept the source explores. Tawakkul, usually translated as trust or reliance. And the source material absolutely demolishes the traditional passive understanding of this word.
It is entirely necessary to demolish it because the traditional understanding of tawakkul is essentially a systemic suicide pact.
Let's define the pathology first. The false comfort of passive reliance. The source shares a historical anecdote that is infuriating but perfectly captures the mindset. A man decides he wants to achieve the ultimate state of spiritual purity. So he abandons his wife and young children in their rural home.
Unbelievable.
He leaves them with zero capital, zero food reserves, and zero means of generating income.
And his rationalization for this gross negligence.
He announces, I am leaving them in God's trust. The universe will provide. And then he marches off to sit in a graveyard for 3 months to meditate, be holy.
It is the ultimate abdication of logistical responsibility, masked as high-level piety.
Exactly. So fast forward 3 months. He returns home, fully expecting his family to either have been miraculously sustained by manna falling from heaven, or more likely, dead from starvation. He walks to the door, and they're completely fine. They are healthy, the house is maintained. He is utterly amazed.
He thinks he's a saint.
He falls to his knees and thinks, my passive trust worked. A miracle. Then he turns to his wife and asks how they survived.
And the unforgiving reality of the physical matrix asserts itself.
The wife looks at him like he's an absolute idiot and says, what are you talking about? We have a buffalo in the yard. I woke up every morning, milked the buffalo, and sold the milk in the market to buy grain. That's how we survived.
Notice the mechanics there. They survived because the wife utilized the physical infrastructure available to her. She engaged directly with the law of requital. She applied human labor to an asset, extracted intrinsic value, engaged in trade, and sustained biological life. The man sitting in the graveyard contributed absolutely nothing to the thermodynamic survival in the system.
And the punchline of the story is the ultimate tragedy of the closed feedback loop. The man completely misses the lesson. Instead of realizing his passive trust was a delusion and his wife's labor was the reality, he goes out into the yard and slaughters the buffalo.
Ugh.
He genuinely believes the buffalo was a crutch competing with his magical trust in the universe.
It is sheer, unadulterated madness. And yet, this is exactly how failing social architectures operate. An elite class builds a terrible extractive system. When the structural cracks begin to show, instead of doing the brutal mathematical work of restructuring their economy, they resort to magical thinking.
Right. They say, we trust in the destiny of our great nation. We are exceptional. The market will magically correct itself.
Exactly. And when the working class, the wife with the buffalo, manages to keep the system barely afloat through sheer grinding labor, the elite look at that survival, claim it as proof of their own exceptionalism, and then pass policies that slaughter the working class.
So if that is the pathology of false trust, what is the systems engineering definition of true tawakkul?
We need to reframe tawakkul purely as a discussion on risk management systems and predictive reliability. Let's use the parachute analogy. Imagine an airborne operations specialist standing at the door of a transport plane at 10,000 feet. The man with the false superstitious trust, the graveyard meditator, steps out of the plane wearing a t-shirt and shorts, closes his eyes, and says, I trust the universe will provide me with a soft landing.
And gravity, being an absolute, non-negotiable law of the Kitab Bin, turns him into a crater.
Gravity does not care about your sentimentality or your national exceptionalism. Now, look at the systems engineer, the individual with true tawakkul. He does not jump with nothing. He has spent weeks studying the fluid dynamics of the atmosphere.
He's prepared.
He has meticulously packed his parachute, folding the silk according to strict geometric principles. He has tested the tensile strength of the rigging lines. He has checked the altimeter telemetry. He has drilled emergency deployment procedures until they are muscle memory. Then, and only then, he steps out of the plane.
And as he is falling at terminal velocity, he trusts the system.
Yes, but what is he trusting? He is trusting the absolute, unyielding laws of aerodynamics to interact with the precisely engineered surface area of the canopy to rapidly decelerate his mass. He has absolute, unwavering confidence in his survival precisely because he has aligned his physical actions perfectly with the universal laws of physics.
It's applied science.
Exactly. True tawakkul is not relying on magic to suspend the rules of the universe for your convenience. It is relying on the absolute, terrifying consistency of those rules to work in your favor because you did the mathematical labor required to harness them.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at the massive blueprint we've just laid out, verses 69 through 81 of Surah An-Naml, filtered through the systems analysis of our source material, what is the ultimate takeaway for the person navigating the world today?
The ultimate synthesis of this deep dive is the relationship between permanence and change. The text is laying down a permanent empirical methodology for civilizational survival. The permanent principle is the law of requital. Every action, every policy, every corporate strategy has an intrinsic, mathematically certain consequence.
Right.
Any social architecture built on the extraction of unearned value will inevitably accumulate systemic entropy until it collapses under the weight of its own math. And the text points you to the physical universe, the archaeological record, the sediment layers, the economic data as the primary, undeniable evidence base for this law.
The laws of physics and sociology are permanent, but the specific ruins we are instructed to go look at, those change.
Exactly. When this empirical injunction was first broadcast, the ruins serving as the data set were the fallen Bronze Age empires, the Hittites, the Pharaohs, the Nabateans. In the 20th century, the ruins were the collapsed economies of heavily centralized authoritarian regimes.
Right.
The specific names, the geography, the technology, those variables change. But the methodological instruction remains relentlessly constant. Travel the earth. Go look. Do not accept inherited superstitious assertions about why things fail when you can verify the systemic math through direct observation.
And this is why this matters to you, the listener. Because whether you are consciously aware of it or not, you are an architect. Whether you are structuring a corporate division, organizing a local municipality, or casting a vote that shapes national macroeconomic policy, you are building a social scaffolding.
You're building a system.
And the universe is utterly indifferent to your good intentions. The only thing that matters is the math of your architecture. Are you building on a foundation of equitable value exchange, or are you building on extractive exploitation? Are you aggressively maintaining open, highly sensitive feedback loops? Or are you retreating underwater because the telemetry data regarding your own dysfunction is too threatening to your ego?
You have to make the choice. The systems physician can only show you the diagnostic scan. You have to pack your own parachute.
And we want to leave you with a final, slightly haunting thought to deconstruct on your own. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about the physical ruins of ancient civilizations. We've talked about isotopic signatures in mass graves, soil salinization, collapsed stone pillars. That was the Kitab Mubin, the clear record of antiquity.
The physical markers of thermodynamic collapse.
Right. But think about the matrix we are constructing right now. We are increasingly migrating our social, economic, and political architectures away from concrete and steel and into the digital realm. We are building empires of code. In 1,000 years, when the predictive sociologists and the systems engineers of the future follow the injunction to travel the Earth and examine the end of our specific era, they might not be dusting off collapsed highway overpasses.
No, the ruins of the 21st century will be algorithmic.
They will be mining our frozen data servers. They will be reverse engineering the source code of our engagement algorithms. They will be looking at the neural network architectures that we designed to maximize outrage, polarization, and attention extraction for short-term corporate profit.
That is a staggering diagnostic reality. They will look at the digital architecture we built to intentionally close our own feedback loops.
Exactly. What will that specific clear record say about the choices we made today? When the future examines the digital strata of our civilization, will they see a society that meticulously packed its parachute with the mathematics of equity, reason, and open data? Or will they see a society that just closed its eyes, stepped out of the aircraft at 10,000 feet, and aggressively hoped for magic?
That is the ultimate test of the law of requital.
Something to deconstruct. Until next time, Keep your feedback loops open, keep your eyes on the telemetry, and keep looking at the data.